the world has officially entered the Second World Cold War. The political confrontation between civilization and the swamp, of course, had been escalating since 2022. But the Cold War is, above all, an arms race and mutual threats of total nuclear annihilation. Annihilation.
He simply vanished.
To use the slang of a St. Petersburg back alley, the pale punk was done in by his own swagger. Because of failures in the war with Ukraine, Putin has constantly had to raise the stakes. For a long time now, to intimidate others, he's been using his attack guinea pig Medvedev, who on social media has already destroyed the entire world, to dust 100 times over with his nuclear outbursts. But no one takes him seriously, so there wasn't much of a reaction. A couple of times Trump trolled Vadimka's delusions with nuclear submarines, and that was the end of it.
Russia threatened us a little not so long ago. I sent nuclear submarines, the deadliest weapons ever created.
But then Putin made a fatal mistake. To boost the morale of his lackeys, Baldy pulled out some old cartoons and announced the successful test of a new so-called superweapon capable of destroying Washington. The Burevestnik missile and the Poseidon nuclear torpedo. The very one that's supposed to wash away Britain.
As is well known, in terms of range, the Burevestnik has surpassed all known missile systems in the world. It has high target accuracy, which it reaches clearly and confidently at a pre-calculated time. I think even foreign specialists were able to see this for themselves. Because during the Burevestnik test on October 21st, a NATO reconnaissance ship was constantly present in the area and at the time of the trials.
The plan was standard: to scare NATO and show that it's impossible to confront Russia and that negotiations are necessary. Or more precisely, Europe should tuck its tail and force Ukraine to capitulate. But to put it mildly, things didn't go very well. There was no reaction at all from the West. Putin's nuclear posturing was simply ignored. The savages just tested another one of their primitive sticks. Nobody cares at all. The Kremlin was very offended by this.
Through diplomatic channels regarding the test of Russia's Burevestnik cruise missile with a nuclear power unit.
I haven't heard of any responses through diplomatic channels. Everyone just kind of went quiet.
But it would have been better for the Kremlin if it continued to be ignored. Because then impulsive Donald, the ballroom builder Trump, took the stage and declared that in response to Russia's nuclear tests, the US would conduct its own nuclear tests.
Russia has a lot of nuclear weapons, and China will have a lot too. They have some, not very many, but...
So why should we test our nuclear weapons?
Well, because we need to see how it works. You know, it's really necessary, and the reason I'm talking about testing is because Russia has announced that it's going to conduct tests. If you notice, North Korea is constantly conducting tests. Other countries are conducting tests. We're the only country that doesn't test, and I don't want us to be the only country that doesn't test nuclear weapons.
The funny thing is, Moscow hasn't conducted any nuclear tests. They supposedly launched missiles with nuclear engines. But Donald, who confuses Slovakia with Slovenia and Armenia with Albania, didn't really look into the issue. He heard the word nuclear and went all out. To reinforce the effect, the US conducted a successful test of the Minuteman intercontinental ballistic missile. 3. The range of this missile is about 9,500 kilometers. The Minuteman III was launched on November 5th from California using an airborne launch system aboard a Mercury aircraft. And this wasn't a cartoon.
And with all these statements, things aren't entirely clear to us. The further actions and steps of the United States of America regarding nuclear weapons testing.
After such news, the pale Führer turned so white he was almost transparent, and in a panic, called an emergency meeting of the entire leadership of Country 404 to decide how to go on living.
We're dying here like animals. Well, we're dying here.
At this gathering of war criminals, Putin, with a trembling voice, declared that Russia would also prepare for nuclear tests.
To take adequate countermeasures. In this regard, I hereby instruct and direct the Ministry of Foreign Affairs as well as the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, in addition to the special services and also the relevant civilian agencies, to take the necessary and appropriate actions in accordance with their respective areas of responsibility and expertise. Do everything possible to collect and gather as much additional information as possible.
This became the final failure of Karlikov-Vashtirlitz. Despite his impressive KGB experience, Putin swallowed the same old tried-and-true bait. The balding carp dragged Russia into a nuclear arms race of attrition, and Reagan is smiling in his grave right now. For those who don't remember, it was precisely because of such an adventure that the Soviet Union collapsed.
Of the two superpowers, only one remained, which is why many credit the United States of America as the victor in the decades-long standoff.
The USSR, unable to withstand political and economic pressure both from outside and within, fell apart. Back then, President Reagan also baited Moscow with the Star Wars program, and the Kremlin threw enormous resources into countering the Americans in space. But it was just a decoy. The Union was fighting windmills and eventually collapsed. After all, Reagan is the president who won the Cold War, and he did it with the help of Star Wars. First of all, you heard that right. Star Wars was an American missile defense project that was launched precisely under Reagan. By the mid-1980s, it had become clear that the Soviet Union was gradually losing ground in its confrontation with the Western Bloc. The economy could not withstand the costly arms race with the United States. The USSR was much stronger economically, scientifically, and militarily than today's so-called under Russia. The Union was not fighting the largest war since World War II, but rather a localized campaign in Afghanistan. And still, the Soviet system couldn't take it and broke down. So by engaging in an arms race, Putin has signed a death sentence for himself and for Russia.
It's not that simple, excuse me. A rubber butt.
Russia's economy is 20 times smaller than those of the US and the EU. Even a conventional arms race is deadly for this leaky gas station, and a strategic nuclear rivalry would end very quickly, with a mutiny of sailors in Kronstadt. Here's a small example of the futility of Putin's saber-rattling. His favorite Burevestnik is just an ordinary cruise missile, but with a small twist. It has a nuclear engine, which means its cost is simply astronomical. Manufacturing, maintaining, and launching a nuclear reactor is incredibly expensive. For example, the Tomahawk, which has similar characteristics and can also carry a nuclear warhead, costs only $1 million. If Russia starts mass-producing Burevestnik missiles, the loyal population will be gnawing on birch bark from hunger within a week.
No, Nikolai, I brought you something to eat.
Producing the Poseidon torpedo will be even more expensive for Russia. If they try to put it on stream, even the birch bark will run out, and the Russians will first start eating up the agents, and then the hurrah patriots.
I just don't understand what made you decide that this is doomsday. Because a weapon based on a new physical principle, if it flies without a nuclear warhead... Wait a minute. That's not the point. It's a small charge. The charge can vary. If we say this is a doomsday weapon, then we're telling the Americans and everyone else, don't worry, we won't use it. But what makes you think we won't use it? But there's hysteria over there.
But the scariest thing for Russia is that all these super expensive wonder weapons are absolutely useless in a real conflict. By the time the Burevestnik missile, flying at the speed of a passenger airliner, reaches its target, the nuclear war will already be over. Because right now, countries are already armed with conventional proven ballistic missiles. Like the Minuteman III, for example. They work perfectly well, and all these perversions with nuclear engines and apocalypse underwater drones are nonsense for the poor. It's not for nothing that both the Americans and the Soviets abandoned these developments back in the 1960s, because it's useless, expensive junk.
All right, that'll do. Thank you for your help.
For example, the US has missile cruisers capable of launching up to 122 Tomahawk missiles at once. But Putin's Burevestnik is a one-off product that the army won't even be able to use as a simple conventional weapon. It already has a nuclear reactor. So the Burevestniks will just end up lying around in storage. So a nuclear reactor and billions in costs will just be sitting in storage. A very profitable investment. But that's not certain. Putin's Botox-soaked brain still hasn't realized that the point of no return has been passed. The Second World Cold War will end exactly the same way as the First, only much faster and even more humiliatingly for the Russian Reich.
I would like to remind you that this video is created for entertainment purposes and contains elements of satire and irony. All facts and events are presented in a hyperbolized or exaggerated form to convey a comedic or dramatic effect. Our goal is not to mislead, but to highlight humor. Please take it with a smile.